Hi there and welcome along to session number 2 of A Serve of Leadership. My name is Ian Crawford. I'm a professional speaker, trainer and coach specialising in leadership and influence. Next to me is my friend and colleague, leadership coach and consultant extraordinaire, Ash Dashlooty. Welcome back, Ash. Session 2. We've had a great response to session number 1, and I think it's fair to say we could probably we've learned quite a bit from our first session.
Oh, mate, we are certainly scrounging around and finding our way forward. But, I think all in all, once I move past that kind of, visceral kind of, deep response of almost vomiting kind of stage, I think we did pretty well with the meeting in the end. Yeah.
It's very interesting how,
Mate, how's your week been?
Yeah, it's been good. Yeah, been good. Always interesting with the old Corona lockdown type stuff. So it seems to be that the world is in Western Australia in particular, it's starting to wake up a little bit and look towards the future rather than being caught in the now, which is quite nice to see. So how did you reckon we went last week? What did we learn? Where are we going this week?
Mate, well, look, I think probably first of all, my big shout out, I think, has got to go out to Sarah in Perth. Because Sarah in Perth actually reached out to us after our last session, which I think surprised all of us, and actually emailed in this week's topic,
which was
mate, amazing, mate. Which was how do leaders go about, leading in this new way of working or around this new way of working.
Okay, so what do you reckon? What's the answer to Sarah's question?
Mate, well, I had a little bit of a think about this over the week, and I think for me, a bit like last week, what I do is I break it down to 3 key things that I think stands out. So when we look at the new ways of working, and I guess the new opportunities that teams and organisations have to work, the best description I can give you for me is we're moving into what's called a one-size-fits-one model.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you go back into the olden days, when you and I first started out in this game, and there was a lot of uniformity, right? So it was everyone started at 9 and we finished at 5. Everyone worked in the same workplace and the same office and things like that. And I think one of the things that's really sort of come through from the world of COVID is now that we really have an amazing opportunity to tailor to not only the individual themselves, but also individual teams.
Yeah.
Because there's a huge amount of variety of, working from home, flexible working arrangements, all this kind of stuff that we can start to leverage off and make for better environments for teams to get stuff done. Now, the one interesting piece with this one-size-fits-one that I think a lot of people don't think about, and in particular from a leader's perspective, is it really increases the complexity and the challenge for leaders, right? So they, again, before in the olden days, it was great. Everyone turned up at 9 and finished at 5. So you knew where everyone was, you knew when they were working, that sort of thing. Now, anyone could be working at any time of day, and you're now trying to gel together how well your team can get stuff done in multiple different locations at multiple different times of the day. And trying to get an alignment and synchronization between that is actually really challenging. So for leaders, they've got to be aware of that complexity, that increasing complexity, and really have to spend time focusing on connection, I think, to be able to make use of that one-size-fits-one world that we're moving into. How does that sit with you, mate?
Yeah, I totally agree with it. And I think what's happened is we've slowly moved away from that 9 to 5 over the last X amount of years. I have no idea. X amount of years. But the COVID
9 to 5 for 15 years.
Yeah, the COVID type and the response to it has just put all those changes on steroids and moved us forward quite dramatically. So in regards to the time that people are working, I think also the placement, leaders are going to have to be able to manage and lead for the person sitting right next to them through to people that are down in the collaborative workplace, if we go back to that, as well as a team member that's at home, as well as the time and things like that. And I think from a performance point of view, it's going to be a challenge for them, but also managing the culture of the team is going to be a challenge. And one of the, just one really simple thing that jumped to mind was the old distance bias. And for those who don't know what that is, distance bias is that as human beings, we tend to give preferential treatment to those people who are closest to us. So if I'm sitting next to if I'm a leader, if I'm not careful, I'll give preferential treatment to you in the jobs and the opportunities to you simply because you're sitting 3 meters away from me versus the person that's 10, 15, 20, 100 kilometers away sitting in their lounge room or their home office dealing with the situation. And that's going to be a challenge not just for the leader, but also the employee understanding that that will occur and putting strategies in place to reduce the impact. So I think, I know it's going to be a real challenge in regards to operationally, outcomes, etc., but also culturally, it's going to be a challenge for them.
So what you're talking about there is the out of sight, out of mind kind of mentality, right? In that if we don't see them, we don't actually, there's a bias to those who are there, but interestingly, there is almost an inherent bias that if I can't see people doing things, then I don't think that they're getting anything done.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because I think some of the poor behaviours that we see result out of that is that, people will log on to their computers and their systems and their instant messaging and things like that just to demonstrate that they are, working and in and around the working space, trying to sort of overcome that bias that you talk about.
And when it comes down to all this whole conversation and the ability for a leader to adapt to what we're calling, for want of a better word, this new norm, is their belief systems. Because if leaders are not really careful, they will come back to the workplace and start driving both their team and their organisation back to the way they were. And I think that is a real shame, simply because, this is a once in a lifetime, possibly, hopefully, a once in a lifetime chance to really transform team and organisational cultures at a really rapid rate. And if leaders are not aware and make decisions based on fact and what's best for the business, ultimate question, what's best for the team, what's best for the business, they're going to just return back to the way it was. And that would be a total shame. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to throw everything out that we used to do, but let's take the really great things that we used to do, take on the really great things that we've just recently learned and combine it together to really build a team that's focused on the person and really deliver some really amazing outcome. And again, like we said last week, really easy to talk about. Consciously, it's easy to do. But this is a belief system, and human beings love beliefs, and that's where they lie. And they love habits, and they like sameness. And if leaders aren't aware of that and constantly ask themselves in a very conscious way, what's best for the business now, they'll just return back, and we'll see workplaces going back to the way they were, and that would be disappointing.
Well, mate, I'll give you an example around that. I was chatting to a leader who's out at a really large oil and gas company. And just recently, actually, in the last sort of week or so, they actually sent a survey out to all of their teams and employees, because obviously we've been working at home for the last 4 or 5 weeks, and said to them, hey, so how, what would you guys like to do? Would you be interested in continuing this kind of arrangement moving forward and the like? And interestingly, I think over 90% of people said they would like to work a minimum of sort of 3 days a week at home, working from home. But what was also interesting to me is not that many people actually said, yeah, I definitely want to spend all my time working from home, right? So there's this sort of, I think sometimes this mistaken belief that, everyone wants to work from home and that it's, the best way to do it, and I get such flexibility. When actually I think people still need the connection of their teams. They still need to, there is still value in actually getting there and doing stuff together and, sharing experiences together. So, most of their people actually wanted a bit of a hybrid model, right? That wanted some time in the office, but also some time at home. Now, interestingly, for that organisation, it's going to be I think, amazing for them because they're already thinking about, well, great, we can start to clear out some office space that we didn't need before. Right? So there's going to be some, I think, really amazing shifts that will happen from there. So I thought that was really good thinking by those leaders to actually ask their team members.
Well, yeah, and if they're getting the results they need, why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you? Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right, we've laboured on that one for a little while. What about the next point? Give Sarah some more advice.
David, shut up. Mate, number two, I think, for me is... Mate, number two for me, when I sort of thought about this, was leaders' ability to maintain a bit of a laser sharp focus, and in particular, really being clear about these strategic priorities, right? Because when you start to include this level of flexibility, agility, all these, the great buzzwords that are coming around at the moment, one of the challenges with that is we can get really focused in on, we can get stuck in on tasks, and we can get stuck in on individual pieces, and sometimes lose track of that bigger picture side of things. So being really clear about what our strategic focus is as a business, so that we can then make sure that as leaders that we are focusing on the most important things. And what that boils down to, I think, in the real world is leaders then being able to say, okay, here's where we need to be going to, or here's what we need to be achieving, and then creating a whole amount of freedom and opportunity for the teams to then think about, well, hey, what resources have we got available? What skills have we got available? How can we go about achieving this, and giving them a real scope to be able to go and achieve that. But you can't do that without that real clarity of strategic priority.
So what you're saying is, give people the framework, what success looks like, and then trust and understand that they have the skills to actually deliver within that framework.
Absolutely. And again, aligned strategically with where we're going, as a business. What's the mission that we're trying to drive towards? What are the strategic focuses that we're trying to focus on and achieve?
And that last comment of yours really leads into what I was going to add to that, was around the why. I think one of the things that leaders need to get around in regards to the changes they'll implement back in the workplace is about why are they doing that. And that will range from, like you said, hey, I'm setting these really clear frameworks. I'm really setting these clear strategic outcomes. And I trust you to deliver that. That's why I'm doing it, because you are better at this than I am, and you have the skills and resources, and explaining that. But taking one step back from that real sort of the landing on the ground type stuff, is leaders having that conversation that when they make those changes and make those decisions about where the organisation is going in the future from a delivery point of view, is explaining about why. And we've seen within this, the whole COVID type stuff, is that when we give the message about why we're doing stuff, people stand up and follow. When it becomes half true, or the message isn't really clear, that's when things go awry. And we're seeing that here in Western Australia at the moment, because I think, as we roll out back into reducing the restrictions, the messages haven't been as clear, and the reasons why they've made those decisions haven't been clear. And for the first time during this, West Australians are starting to go, well, do I do that, or do I do this, or do I do that, or do I do that? They haven't got a framework to actually make that decision. And one of the best examples that I saw was out of the really interesting stuff that we're seeing out of America, is towards the beginning of the whole COVID stuff, the coronavirus task force, they came out and gave a very sobering presentation around their projections of, hey, this corona thing that we're talking about is going to cause 100,000 to 240,000 American deaths. Now, that's a really scary stat. But with that stat, the reason to isolate and to lock down became a very, very good reason to do that, because they had a really strong why. And now that we're getting half-truths and conspiracy theories, and we're seeing the response to that in America, because people are making other decisions now that aren't necessarily good. Well, I know that this is a really important part, but very few leaders actually have this conversation. They talk about the process rather than the framework or the why that we've been talking about, and people struggle.
Well, And I think similar to the conversation we had last week where we were talking about leading through crisis, for me, a lot of this work, in particular by leaders, is done pre these times, right? And I think it is when I've noticed with a lot of the really good leaders that I have worked with is they have done this work themselves individually. So they're very clear about what their guiding principle is for them as leaders and their vision as leaders. But also, obviously, as you spoke about last week, is they've done the work with their teams, right? So there is a clarity within the team around our mission and our strategic focus. And yes, sometimes that strategic focus may shift and we have that conversation and we realign them. But the leaders, I think, who are really reveling or who are performing at the best have done the work previously, right? Because when they've now come to periods of pressure or periods of crisis, you can't just turn this stuff on instantaneously, right? Leadership itself is a skill, or, in my world, I think leadership is a craft. It's something that you've got to be refining and challenging and working and testing, day after day, moment after moment, year after year, so that when the time comes, you can then hopefully execute that skill under the toughest of conditions, right? So I think, this laser sharp focus, yes, you are refining, and I think your point was redefining when we spoke about something similar to this last week, is making sure that we are tying back the conversations, the decisions we make and things like that, the conversations that we're having to the strategic focus, right? We're realigning back to these conversations we've had.
Yeah, I'm spot on. Absolutely spot on. So Sarah's point 3, we'll call this a Sarah session.
Sarah session.
Point number 3 for Sarah and anyone else that's listening.
Again, what I've observed from those who do this really well is leaders get out of the way. And what I mean by that is one of the biggest risks that comes from this sort of new way of working is an increase in system complexity. So while there's a whole pile of moving pieces that leaders have to manage, one of the natural responses to that is we sort of tap into the old way of doing things, where the old way of doing things is let's put in more rules, more procedures, more structures in place to get stuff done. And while that seemed to work before by providing some basic, structure and real clear definitions for people, what I say to really good leaders now is they've leveraged away from that now, and they don't just automatically put in a high level of processes and rules and procedures and things like that. What they do more so is they actually create, what I would call strategies, right? Strategies to govern the behavior of their teams and to figure out how they can influence and support the behavior of their teams to achieve the goals of the project they're trying to do, all those strategic focuses. So it's a subtle shift, but let's not put layers of complexity in place. What are the overarching rules and strategies that we can use that can help to facilitate where our teams need to get to? The other thing is, as an extension to that, is that these leaders, what they seem to do is they've tended to trust previously. And what I mean by that is not only do they lean towards trusting more so than not, they've actually taken the time to tend to and nurture the trust within their teams. So when they come to these new environments or these new ways of working, they're now just leveraging that trust. But then they also spend time making sure that connection, that relationship, that trust is further nurtured through the interaction. So whether it is, we do implement regular team catch-up so that we can have conversations and connection, not so much just specifically because we need to get something done or make a decision about something. They understand the power of the relationship in these situations because, again, they're trusting their people that they get stuff done, they do it well, they can probably do it better than the leader can in itself. So the leader's job is just facilitating that and simplifying things for people to get stuff done. That, for me, is number 3.
And like you said, get the hell out of the way. Some of the I was sure that you would agree that some of the conversations, the coaching that we have when we go and do review of teams and and businesses is sometimes the biggest issue is the leader. And, putting those things in place that you just mentioned is one way of setting people up for success, the team up for success, and ultimately is set the standards and then just get the hell out of the way, let people do their work. One of the things that really struck me in regards to this, going back to where we were and transitioning into this new norm, I wish we could think of a new word, but that's what we're using at the moment, is that when people are coming out of what they're experiencing now back into their maybe 3 days in the workplace and 2 at home or whatever it is that people are going to be coming into the workplace with excitement, some of them, but also people are going to come in with a high level of fear. And because of this, this is the time for leaders to really up their what we call soft skills, their empathy, their humility, their listening skills, etc., etc. They really need to
use soft skills with me. Use that term with me. That makes me bristle, that term, soft skills.
It's soft skills with hard impact. How's that? So dig myself out of that. It's those skills that really sit at the foundation of leadership, and those leaders that really struggle with that or lack those skills are going to really struggle. But we have to be aware of it, that people aren't just going to return and go, hey, this is great, and be back to normal. There's either going to be a longer continuum of either really great excitement, hey, we're back, through to this is terrifying. And we have to be aware of that, and the leaders have to step up and support their people.
So you're talking about the individual responses, I guess, that people are having and where they are in, sometimes people call it the change curve, or, sometimes they call it, those individual responses that people are having. Yeah. So you're talking about the different individual, reactions to the change that people are experiencing.
Well, and it's not surprising. You imagine, I've been sitting at home for the last 6 weeks, and in some countries around the world, I've now been told by the government that we're now going to return back to work. But as I return back to work, I know that 60 or 70,000 people have died because of this thing that I was isolated with. And that's terrifying for some people. And so, again, leaders just have to be aware of it, and they have to put some things. And one of the things as we move towards our final conversation around this is I think we've got to be careful that we don't see this as all being bad, the whole coronavirus thing in regards to business. You've mentioned a number of things in regards to how we can improve our workplace because of being forced to adapt and pivot. But I think the silver lining is that this is demonstrated to a lot of organizations that they have skills and abilities to be flexible way beyond their perceived capacity before this. And I know the industries that you work in. We both work in similar sort of industries. And I know that a lot of the organizations that I work with would say that their culture is very change resistant. Now, I would totally agree with them. But they've just proved over the very short period of time that culturally and performance-wise, they can pivot very, very fast and do it very, very well. And so the silver lining that I'm perceiving out of this whole COVID stuff is never again can those organizations use the excuse that, we can't introduce this because the people are against change, they don't like change. We've proved that your organization has the capacity to be able to pivot and change and deliver results very, very quickly when required to. And if you do it once, I'm of the belief that you can do it over and over again.
Yes. Let's see how well the organisational memory and learning takes place. And it's funny you mentioned that because I did have a conversation with a manager out at one of the big global mining houses, and they were talking about exactly that, about how they were amazed at how quickly they were able to do things now and get things done and not have to get 15 levels of approval and things like that. But one of the things that I sort of suggested to them is I said, look, you need to employ in the olden days, there used to be wartime reporters, right, or photographers who would go around and basically just document what had been happening through the war so that we would learn and remember the experiences of what's happened there. And I jokingly said, you know what, you need to employ a wartime reporter for your business, just so they can sit in on the meetings and just record exactly what you've done. Don't you remember that, hey, 6 weeks ago, we were in the middle of this. We were able to make these really big strategic decisions in the space of a day, not over 6 weeks. don't you remember that actually, you know, we were able to empower our people to do these things without all the rules? Because I think sometimes we forget about these things, right? So fingers crossed, I hope your silver lining theory does sail through and that they remember. But also, if I strip that down into the role of leaders in that place, is leaders in particular should be making notes of these experiences and ensuring they drive that optimistic perspective with people moving forward. For me, again, optimism is a skill and it's an optimistic team, but it is something that you can develop and train within yourself and within your team. So making sure that you make note of these experiences and especially the challenges that we went through, but also how we were able to really overcome and find ways. If we don't make note of those and then share them back and keep reminding ourselves, then they do get forgotten.
Absolutely. And we saw that through the global financial downturn. You know, we saw organisations respond very, very quickly, but also very, very quickly they returned to the way they were. So fingers crossed on that one. So is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish up and say farewell?
I'm all out of juice, mate. That's it for me.
Really, it doesn't take much for us these days, does it? So,
I'm fatigued. I haven't worked 9 to 5 for 20 years. I'm fatigued.
Exactly. So Ash and I are looking at putting together these weekly serves of leadership advice. And if you missed out last week on Leading Through Challenging Times, the link is below. Please go and check it out. So if you enjoy this and you have a topic or a question like Sarah that you would like us
to... Good work, Sarah.
Yeah, good work, Sarah. Love your work, Sarah. If you'd like something that we'd like to, a question or a topic that you'd like us to address, please let us know. Our contact details are now on the screen. Send us some information or a question and we'd be very, very happy to respond to it. But I'm going to say farewell to you, Ash. Thanks very much.
Farewell, Captain.
We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.